The charity gala had ended 20 minutes ago, but the ballroom of the Hartford Regency still hummed with the murmur of lingering conversations and the soft clink of champagne glasses. Nathan Cross stood near the coat check, his phone already in hand, checking the time for the third time in as many minutes. The screen displayed Emma's text from 12 minutes prior. "Daddy, when are you coming home? I practiced my presentations of times." He smiled despite the exhaustion pressing against his temples, thumbs moving across the glass. "10 minutes, sweetheart. Can't wait to see it." The coat check attendant handed him his jacket, the navy wool still warm from the heated closet. Nathan shrugged it on, already calculating the drive time to his house in West Hartford. Friday night traffic would be light at this hour. Emma's babysitter had a 10:30 curfew, and he'd promised to be back by 10:15. The math worked if he left now. A voice behind him, barely above a whisper, fractured the rhythm of his exit. "Mr. Cross." "Wait." He turned slowly, instinct pulling his shoulders back into professional posture. Victoria Whitmore stood 3 feet away, one hand pressed flat against the paneled wall, as if the mahogany were the only thing keeping her upright. The CEO of Whitmore Properties, a woman who commanded boardrooms across 3 states, looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Her champagne flute dangled from her other hand at an angle that suggested she'd forgotten it existed. The liquid inside trembled, tiny waves catching the chandelier light. Nathan's first thought was medical. His second was that whatever had broken this woman open, it had nothing to do with alcohol. Her eyes were too clear, too desperate, the kind of clarity that came from decisions being made in real time. She straightened slightly, pulling her hand from the wall with visible effort. The words came out fractured, each one fighting its way past some internal barrier. I need to ask you something." Nathan glanced at his watch. Emma, the presentation, the babysitter's curfew, every fiber of his carefully constructed life pulling him toward the door. But something in Victoria's face held him in place, the same instinct that made him stop when Emma's breathing changed in the night, that radar for human need that couldn't be ignored. He set his phone face down on the coat check counter. "Are you all right?" Victoria's laugh came out sharp and hollow, a sound that belonged in an empty room. "No, I'm not." She looked past him toward the exit, toward whatever waited beyond these walls, and her composure cracked further. "I need to know how you do it." Nathan's jaw tightened. In 8 months of working on the New Haven waterfront project, Victoria Whitmore had been nothing but professional, cordial, efficient, every interaction bounded by project timelines and deliverables. He'd noticed her, of course. It was impossible not to notice someone who could silence a room with a question or reshape a skyline with a signature. But noticing was where he'd drawn the line, where he always drew the line, because the space between noticing and wanting was where men like him got lost. He kept his voice level, the same tone he used when Emma asked questions that didn't have easy answers. "Do what?" Victoria's fingers tightened around the champagne flute until her knuckles went white. "Say no. You've turned down every dinner invitation I've extended. You left our last meeting at 5 o'clock sharp, even though we hadn't finished reviewing the structural modifications. You're the only person in my entire orbit who treats my time as less valuable than—" Her voice caught reset itself at a lower register. "Than a bedtime story." The truth of it settled in Nathan's chest like a stone dropped in still water. He thought of the 17 meetings over 8 months, the way he'd watched other consultants rearrange their lives around Victoria's schedule, while he'd simply stated his availability and refused to negotiate. The way her assistant had stopped asking if he could work late, stopped offering incentives, stopped trying to fit him into the shape Victoria's world required. His phone buzzed against the counter. Emma again, probably wondering if 10 minutes had somehow stretched into 20. Nathan picked it up, silenced it, met Victoria's gaze directly. "My daughter is more important than any career opportunity. That's not a hard choice for me." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a hairline fracture spreading across whatever mask she'd worn into this conversation. Her eyes began to glisten, the champagne flute trembling harder now, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost all its boardroom steel. "What if someone never taught you how to make that choice? What if you're 36 years old and you just realized you've never said no to anything that actually mattered?" Nathan felt the question land somewhere beneath his ribs in the place where he kept the memories of his own breaking points. He recognized the texture of this moment, the way a person looked when they'd finally run out of room to run. 5 years ago, he'd stood in a parking lot at 2 in the morning with his marriage disintegrating around him and Emma asleep in her car seat, and he'd felt this same desperate clarity. The moment when you realized the life you'd been living wasn't yours at all. But this wasn't his crisis to solve. He had a daughter waiting at home, a presentation to celebrate, a babysitter to relieve. He had boundaries for a reason. Walls he'd built, not out of coldness, but out of love for a 9-year-old who'd already lost one parent to restlessness. Nathan reached for his jacket collar, adjusting it more from habit than need. "Ms. Whitmore, I can't help you figure out your life. I have my hands full with my own." Victoria nodded, the movement sharp and final, as if she'd expected this answer and was grateful to have it confirmed. She set the champagne flute on the coat check counter with the precision of someone who just remembered she was holding it. "You're right, I'm sorry. This was inappropriate." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it felt like witnessing something private. Nathan picked up his phone, slid it into his jacket pocket. Every instinct told him to walk away, to preserve the careful architecture of his life, to get home to Emma before the moment passed. But he paused at the threshold between the coat check area and the main lobby, the marble floor gleaming under lights that had begun to dim as staff prepared to close the venue for the night. He looked back at Victoria, still standing there, with her hand pressed against the wall, and something in him softened despite his better judgment. "For what it's worth, Ms. Whitmore, the fact that you're asking the question means you already know the answer." Nathan walked out into the November night, the cold air hitting his face like a reset button. Behind him, Victoria remained in the doorway, watching the space where he'd stood, one hand still braced against the wood. For a woman who'd built an empire on knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, she'd never felt so utterly exposed by her own voice. The drive home took 12 minutes. Emma was waiting at the kitchen table, her presentation notes spread across the surface in careful stacks, her face splitting into a grin when Nathan walked through the door. The babysitter gathered her things and left with a wave, and Nathan settled into his chair to listen to Emma describe the water cycle with the kind of enthusiasm that made every late meeting worthwhile. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Nathan stood in his darkened living room and let himself think about Victoria's question. He'd spent 5 years building this life, this careful routine that protected Emma from chaos. 5 years since Clarissa had walked out. 5 years since he'd learned that safety was something you constructed one decision at a time and maintained through vigilance. The memory came back sharp and unwelcome. Emma at 4 years old asking where mommy went. Nathan with no answer that wouldn't break her further. Clarissa's words still echoing in his head from the parking lot confrontation 2 weeks before she'd finally left. "I never wanted this life, Nathan. I settled for you." He tried to save it for 6 months after discovering the text messages, the late-night calls that stopped, when he entered a room the way Clarissa started looking at their small house like it was a prison cell. He'd suggested counseling, date nights, anything to rebuild what they'd once had. But Clarissa hadn't wanted to rebuild. She'd wanted escape, and she'd found it with a hedge fund manager from Greenwich who could offer her the life she'd always believed she deserved. The divorce had been swift once Clarissa decided. She'd signed away custody without negotiation, without even asking for visitation rights. Nathan had watched her lawyer push the papers across the table, watched Clarissa sign her name, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of human nature. She'd chosen her exit so completely that Emma had become a character in a story Clarissa no longer wanted to read. He'd built his walls after that, not out of anger but out of necessity. Emma needed stability more than Nathan needed companionship. She needed a parent who would be there every morning, every evening, every school performance, and science fair. Nathan had turned down promotions that required travel, declined after-hours socializing that might compromise his schedule, and constructed a life measured in school pickups and bedtime stories. The walls weren't to keep the world out, they were to keep Emma safe inside. 3 days after the gala, Nathan's boss called him into the conference room at Morrison & Associates. David Morrison was a man who'd built his architecture firm on relationships and reputation, someone who understood that buildings were sold as much through trust as through blueprints. He sat at the head of the table with his hands folded. his expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set Nathan's instincts on edge. David didn't waste time on preamble. We're reassigning you from the Whitmore Properties project. Nathan felt the words land, but didn't react, years of discipline keeping his expression level. Why my work has been exemplary. The structural modifications I proposed came in under budget and ahead of schedule. David looked away, his gaze sliding toward the window that overlooked downtown Hartford. Client relationship concerns. That's all I can say. The vagueness was deliberate, Nathan realized. David wasn't just uncomfortable, he was being careful. Someone had applied pressure and David had folded. Nathan thought of the 17 meetings of professional distance he'd maintained, the absolute absence of anything that could be construed as inappropriate. He thought of Victoria at the gala, her breakdown, her question about saying no. He kept his voice measured, every word a stone dropped into water. I need to know what I'm being accused of. David's shoulders tensed. You're not being accused of anything. The client has requested a different consultant. That's within their rights. He pulled a folder from the stack beside his legal pad, slid it across the table. We've secured a new contract with Whitmore Properties. $15 million over 3 years. But you won't be the lead on any of their projects going forward. Understanding crystallized in Nathan's mind, cold and complete. Someone powerful had offered Morrison and Associates something they couldn't refuse, contingent on removing Nathan from Victoria's orbit. Someone who understood that the most effective threats were the ones that looked like opportunities. Nathan stood, leaving the folder untouched on the table. I'll finish documenting my work on the New Haven project. Make the transition clean for whoever's taking over. David's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping an inch. I appreciate your professionalism. This doesn't reflect poorly on you. Your position here is secure. Nathan walked out without responding because they both knew that wasn't true. His position was secure as long as he stayed away from Victoria Whitmore, as long as whoever had orchestrated this remained satisfied. He'd just learned that his career could be shaped by forces he couldn't see, decisions made in rooms he'd never enter. That evening, after Emma had finished her homework and they'd eaten dinner together, Nathan found the envelope. It was wedged into his front door, plain manila with no return address. He opened it standing on his porch, the November air biting at his exposed hands. Inside was a single photograph, 8 by 10, printed on glossy paper. Emma at school on the playground, caught mid-laugh while talking to a friend. The angle suggested telephoto lens distance, someone watching from beyond the fence line. Beneath the photo, a note in neat handwriting. Children need stability. Don't create chaos where there is order. Nathan's hands went cold, the envelope slipping from his fingers to land on the porch boards. He stared at the photo, at Emma's smile, at the casual cruelty of using his daughter as a warning. Someone had been watching her. Someone had taken this photo deliberately, not as documentation but as threat. He pulled out his phone, dialed Garrett's number. His brother answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the background noise of a high school cafeteria during lunch duty. Nathan, what's wrong? Nathan kept his voice level through sheer force of will. Someone just threatened Emma. I need you to come over. Tonight. Garrett's response was immediate, all concern and no questions. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Nathan gathered the photo and envelope, carried them inside, locked the door behind him. Emma was upstairs doing math homework, her voice drifting down as she hummed some melody from a movie she'd watched last week. Safe, unaware, exactly as she should be. But the safety was an illusion now. Someone had shattered it, and Nathan had no idea how to rebuild it. Garrett arrived 19 minutes later, his pickup truck parking in the driveway with its engine still ticking when he knocked. Nathan handed him the envelope without speaking, watched his brother's face go through the same progression of shock, anger, and calculation. Garrett set the photo down carefully, his jaw tight. You need to call the police. Nathan had already considered it, run through every scenario. And tell them what? Someone took a photo of my daughter on public property. No explicit threat, no contact, nothing that rises to the level of... Garrett cut him off, his teacher's authority bleeding into his voice. Someone is watching your child. That's a threat. Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the street where porch lights had begun to flicker on as evening deepened into night. Somewhere out there, someone was orchestrating this. Someone with resources and no boundaries. Someone who believed Nathan was a problem that needed to be eliminated. He thought of Victoria at the gala being fired 3 days later, of this photo arriving now. The timeline was too clean to be coincidence. Someone wanted him away from Victoria Whitmore badly enough to weaponize his daughter. Nathan turned back to Garrett, the decision already made. I need you to stay here tonight. Sleep on the couch. I'll take Emma to school tomorrow, but after that I need to figure out who's behind this. Garrett nodded, no hesitation. I'll call in sick for the rest of the week if you need me to. Nathan felt gratitude settle warm against the cold fear. Garrett had always been the steady one, the brother who showed up without being asked, who understood that sometimes the best help was just presence. Thank you. That night, Nathan lay awake in his bedroom with his door open, listening to Emma's breathing in the room across the hall and Garrett's shifting on the couch downstairs. The photo sat on his dresser face down, but he could feel its presence like a weight. Someone had invaded the careful architecture of his life, had breached the walls he'd spent 5 years building. And the worst part was, he had no idea how to fight back against an enemy he couldn't see. 2 weeks crawled by in a state of heightened vigilance. Nathan varied his routes to Emma's school, checked the street before letting her leave the car, installed motion sensor lights on his porch. Garrett came by 3 times, his presence a reminder that Nathan wasn't alone in this. But nothing happened. No more photos, no more contact, no escalation. Just silence, which somehow felt more menacing than any threat. Then Victoria appeared. Nathan was in the parking lot of Morrison and Associates, unlocking his car after a long day of documentation work, when a voice cut through the afternoon air. Mr. Cross. He turned to find Victoria Whitmore standing 10 feet away, her wool coat pulled tight against the December cold. She looked different than she had at the gala, steadier, more grounded, but with an urgency in her eyes that suggested she'd been waiting for him. Nathan's instincts flared. Ms. Whitmore, you shouldn't be here. She moved closer, her heels clicking against the asphalt. I know you were removed from my project. I demanded an explanation from Richard Blackwood. He stonewalled me. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, held it up so Nathan could see the photo of 2 small devices, black and metallic, lying on a white cloth. I found listening devices in my office, 2 of them. I had my IT department sweep the building yesterday. Nathan's jaw tightened, pieces clicking into place. Richard Blackwood, the COO, who'd worked for Victoria's family for 2 decades, who'd been pushing for her arranged marriage, who had everything to lose if Victoria started making her own choices. He looked at Victoria's phone, at the evidence of surveillance, and felt the weight of the photo in his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, unable to leave it at home where Emma might find it. He pulled it out, handed it to Victoria without explanation. She took it, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she registered what she was seeing. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the photo over, read the note on the back. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing. This is my daughter. Nathan's correction came automatically. Mine, Emma. Someone took that photo 2 weeks ago, left it on my door with a warning. Victoria's face went white, the kind of pale that suggested genuine shock rather than performance. She handed the photo back carefully as if it were something fragile. Richard, it has to be Richard. Her voice dropped, fury and calculation mixing in equal measure. He pushed hardest for my marriage to Alexander Pennington. His son works for the Pennington family's investment firm. He has everything to gain from keeping me under control. Nathan slid the photo back into his pocket, the weight of it familiar now. This is exactly why I can't be involved. Someone is watching us. Someone threatened my daughter. My job is to protect Emma, not to help you figure out your life. Victoria nodded, but her expression suggested she'd expected this response. I understand, I do, but I need you to see the full picture. She pulled up another image on her phone, this one a screenshot of what looked like financial records. I've been going through company files since I found the listening devices. Richard's been moving money, small amounts spread across dozens of accounts. I don't have proof yet, but I think he's been embezzling. Nathan studied the numbers, his architect's mind automatically tracking patterns and discrepancies. If Victoria was right, Richard Blackwood wasn't just protective of the family legacy, he was protecting himself. An arranged marriage would bring external auditors, new oversight people who might discover what he'd been hiding. Richard needed Victoria's marriage to happen to cover his tracks, which meant Richard would do whatever it took to eliminate any obstacle. Nathan looked at Victoria, at the determination in her face despite the fear underneath. She was piecing this together in real time, connecting dots that led to dangerous conclusions. And she'd come to him, the one person who'd said no, because she had no one else. He thought of Emma upstairs in their house right now, probably doing homework with Garrett watching from the couch. He thought of the photo, the threat, the way someone had weaponized his love for his daughter. He thought of 5 years spent building walls and how easily those walls had been breached by someone with enough resources and no conscience. The smart choice was to walk away, cut all contact with Victoria, protect Emma by removing himself from this equation entirely. Let Victoria fight her own battles with her family and her COO and whatever corruption she'd uncovered. But Nathan had spent 5 years making the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that minimized risk and maximized stability. And standing in this parking lot looking at a woman who'd asked him how to say no, because she'd never learned, he realized that sometimes the safe choice was just another word for hiding. He met Victoria's gaze directly, the December wind cutting between them. "I'll meet with you 3 times. That's it. No more. You figure out your life, I protect mine." After 3 meetings were done, Victoria's breath caught visible in the cold air. Why 3? Nathan thought of Emma asking him last year if he'd ever date again, asking the question 3 different times over 3 different weeks before he'd finally said maybe instead of no. 3 was his limit for uncomfortable questions, for decisions that required him to push past his own defenses. He kept his expression neutral. "Because that's how many times my daughter asked me if I'd ever move on before I stopped automatically refusing. 3 is my limit for questions I don't want to answer." A smile flickered across Victoria's face, brief and genuine. "Thank you." Nathan pulled his keys from his pocket, already calculating logistics. Coffee shop, public place. 1 hour. Tomorrow at 2. Victoria nodded, pulling out her own phone to make a note. "I'll be there." Nathan got into his car, watched Victoria walk to her own vehicle, a silver Mercedes that looked too expensive to park in an office lot. He thought about what he'd just agreed to, about the risks and the consequences, about Emma and the photo and Richard Blackwood's surveillance. He thought about the walls he'd built and the way they'd become a prison as much as a protection. Then he drove home to his daughter, to the ordinary evening of homework and dinner and bedtime stories, to the life he'd constructed so carefully. But something had shifted, some fundamental decision made in that parking lot. He'd said yes when every instinct screamed no. He'd chosen risk over safety, and he had no idea if that made him brave or reckless. That night, after Emma was asleep, Nathan called Brett Sullivan. They'd been roommates at UConn 15 years ago, back when Nathan had believed architecture could change the world, and Brett had been convinced investigative journalism could hold power accountable. Brett had gone on to work for the Hartford Courant Building, a reputation for uncovering corruption in state government in corporate Connecticut. Brett answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the background noise of a newsroom at deadline. "Nathan Cross, it's been, 3 years?" Nathan kept his voice low, conscious of Emma sleeping upstairs. "I need you to investigate someone. Quietly. I think you'll find a big story, but it needs to stay off the record until we have everything." Brett's interest sharpened audibly. "I'm listening." Nathan laid it out: Richard Blackwood, Whitmore Properties, the surveillance, the threats, Victoria's discovery of financial irregularities. He left out his own involvement, framed it as a tip from a concerned friend of the family. Brett knew how to read between lines. When Nathan finished, Brett was silent for a long moment. Then, "Give me 3 weeks. If there's something there, I'll find it." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest, the first hint that he wasn't fighting this alone. "Thank you." Brett's voice softened, the journalist dropping away to reveal the friend underneath. "Nathan, be careful. People who bug offices and threaten kids, they don't stop just because you're being cautious." Nathan looked at the photo on his dresser, at Emma's smile, frozen in that moment of playground innocence. "I know. That's why I called you." After they hung up, Nathan stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the street where security lights cast pools of yellow on wet pavement. Somewhere out there, Richard Blackwood was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. But Nathan wasn't just waiting anymore. He'd made his choice in that parking lot, said yes to 3 meetings set in motion, a chain of events he couldn't fully control. He thought about Victoria at the gala, asking how he said no. He thought about his own walls, built so carefully over 5 years, and whether they'd kept him safe or just kept him frozen. Emma stirred in her sleep across the hall, making that small sound she'd made since she was a baby, half sigh and half dream. Nathan felt the familiar ache of love and fear mixing in his chest. Everything he did was for her. Every choice, every boundary, every carefully calculated decision. But maybe he thought part of protecting Emma was showing her what it looked like to stand up when standing up mattered, to choose courage over safety when the situation demanded it, to be the kind of father who didn't hide from threats but faced them head on, even when facing them was terrifying. The coffee shop Nathan chose was deliberately public, deliberately neutral, a Starbucks on Farmington Avenue that was always crowded at 2 in the afternoon. He arrived 10 minutes early, claimed a table near the window where he could see both entrances, and ordered black coffee he didn't particularly want. The gesture was about control, about setting the parameters of this meeting before Victoria arrived. She walked in at exactly 2 o'clock, her wool coat unbuttoned to reveal a simple black sweater and jeans that suggested she'd been learning how to dress like someone who didn't have a personal stylist. She ordered something complicated that required 3 clarifications to the barista, and Nathan revised his assumption Victoria was still learning how to be a person who ordered her own coffee. She sat across from him, her fingers wrapping around the cup for warmth. The afternoon light through the window caught the exhaustion in her face, the kind that suggested too many nights spent staring at ceilings and wrestling with impossible decisions. Nathan set his phone face up on the table, then activated the timer, set it for 60 minutes. The gesture was deliberate, a visible reminder that this had boundaries. Victoria's eyes tracked the movement, and something that looked like understanding crossed her face. He pulled a legal pad from his messenger bag, clicked his pen. "We're going to do an exercise. List 10 things you do every day. Actual activities, not categories. Be specific." Victoria pulled out her own notebook, expensive leather with her initials embossed in gold, and started writing. Nathan watched her hand move across the paper, neat block letters forming a list that grew longer than 10 items. When she finished, she pushed the notebook across the table. Nathan read board meetings at 8, conference calls with East Coast investors, review contracts and legal documents, lunch meetings with potential partners, gym session with personal trainer, dinner obligations, family or networking, beauty treatments, wardrobe consultations, social media presence review, charity event planning, family dinner with mother every Sunday. He pulled a red pen from his pocket, met her eyes. "Now go through and mark which ones you want to do versus which ones you feel obligated to do." Victoria stared at the list, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. Seconds stretched into a minute. Nathan waited, watching her face cycle through emotions, resistance, realization, something that looked almost like grief. Finally, she picked up his red pen with a hand that trembled slightly. She didn't mark anything as want. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't, I can't." She set the pen down, pressed both palms flat against the table, as if physically grounding herself. "I don't know who I am without a list of obligations." Nathan felt the weight of that confession settle in the space between them. He'd expected resistance, expected her to mark at least a few items, expected some version of denial. Instead, she'd hit bedrock, immediately exposed the fundamental emptiness at the center of her life with an honesty that felt almost reckless. He leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice level. "Then that's what you need to figure out. Not for me, not for anyone else. For yourself, before you can say no to the wrong things, you have to know what the right things are." Victoria looked up, and Nathan saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "How do you know what the right things are?" Nathan thought about Emma at the kitchen table last night, explaining some elaborate theory about dinosaurs she'd developed, her enthusiasm infectious, even when the logic was shaky. He thought about the way his chest tightened every time she climbed the bus stairs of school, that moment of pure fear and pure love mixed together. He thought about standing in grocery stores, choosing between cereal brands based solely on which one would make his daughter smile at breakfast. His answer came simple and direct. "You know, because when you think about not doing them, you feel loss instead of relief." Victoria absorbed this, her fingers moving unconsciously to trace the edge of her notebook. Around them, the coffee shop continued its afternoon rhythm, students with laptops, retirees with newspapers, young mothers with strollers. Normal people living normal lives, making choices that felt small, but added up to something real. Nathan wondered when Victoria had last felt normal, or if she ever had. She closed her notebook, the sound crisp in the ambient noise. I need an assignment. Something concrete. Nathan checked his phone. 37 minutes remaining. He'd expected this to take longer, expected more resistance. But Victoria was approaching this like a project breaking down an impossible problem into manageable tasks. He could work with that. He tapped his pen against the legal pad. This week, choose one thing you want to do. Not something big, not life-changing. Just one small thing that's for yourself, not for obligation or expectation. Then do it. Don't announce it, don't make it meaningful, just do it. Victoria nodded slowly, making a note on a fresh page. In next meeting, Nathan's jaw tightened. 3 meetings. That was the deal. But something in Victoria's eagerness, in the way she was already planning ahead, triggered his protective instincts. This wasn't a project to be managed. This was a life to be rebuilt, and rebuilding took time she might not have. He kept his voice firm. We'll see. Finish the assignment first. They talked for the remaining 30 minutes about practical things, how to identify what mattered, how to create space for reflection, how to start saying no to small things before tackling the larger battles. Nathan found himself drawing on 5 years of single parenting, of learning how to prioritize and protect, of understanding that every yes to one thing meant a no to something else. When the timer went off, Victoria stood immediately, respecting the boundary. Thank you, I know this isn't easy for you. Nathan gathered his things, conscious of the other patrons who'd been watching them with varying degrees of interest. A man and a woman at a corner table, one with expensive coffee and one with intent. In Hartford's small professional community, it wouldn't take long for word to spread that Nathan Cross and Victoria Whitmore had been spotted together. He walked Victoria to her car the December afternoon, already dimming toward evening. As she unlocked the Mercedes, Nathan noticed the black SUV parked 3 rows over its windows. Too dark to be legal in Connecticut, its engine running despite the empty driver's seat visible through the windshield. He touched Victoria's arm, subtle enough to not draw attention, but firm enough to make her pause. His voice dropped to barely audible. Black SUV, 3 rows back. Someone's watching. Victoria's posture stiffened, but she didn't turn to look. How long? Nathan kept his face neutral, as if they were discussing normal afternoon plans. Since we went inside. Maybe before. Victoria opened her car door, slid into the driver's seat, with movements that suggested she'd had practice maintaining composure under observation. Before closing the door, she looked up at Nathan with an expression that mixed fear and determination. They're not going to stop, are they? Nathan thought about the photo of Emma, about the listening devices in Victoria's office, about Brett Sullivan's investigation that had now been running for 2 weeks. No, they're not. Victoria nodded once, closed her door, drove away without looking back. Nathan waited until her car had cleared the parking lot before walking to his own vehicle. The SUV stayed put, engine idling, windows reflecting his image as he passed. He pulled out his phone, photographed the license plate as casually as possible, sent it to Garrett with a simple message, "Run this for me." The response came before he'd reached his car. Already on it. Stay safe. Garrett's text came through at 7 the next morning while Nathan was making Emma's lunch. SUV registered to Sentinel Security Services. Private firm, high-end clients. Someone paid for professional surveillance. Nathan stared at the words mayonnaise knife suspended over wheat bread. Professional surveillance meant money resources, a client willing to pay premium rates to monitor his movements. He thought about Richard Blackwood, about Whitmore Properties' annual revenue, measured in hundreds of millions, about how easily that kind of wealth could purchase any service, including watching a single father in West Hartford. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack already on, hair pulled into the ponytail Nathan had learned to braid from YouTube tutorials 5 years ago. Her voice carried the particular brightness of a 9-year-old who'd finished her homework early. Ready, Daddy. Nathan slid her sandwich into a plastic container, added carrot sticks and apple slices, zipped the lunch bag closed. The ordinary rhythm of morning routines felt suddenly precarious, like performing familiar choreography on a stage that had started to tilt. He drove Emma to school through Friday morning traffic, watched her disappear through the heavy doors of West Hartford Elementary, and felt the now familiar spike of fear. Professional surveillance. Someone watching his daughter. Someone calculating moves several steps ahead. His phone rang before he'd left the parking lot. Brett Sullivan's voice came through, urgent and focused. I've got something. Not enough for publication yet, but enough to know you were right. Richard Blackwood's been moving money for 6 years. Small transfers, always under reporting thresholds. Ghost contractors on construction projects, inflated invoices, kickbacks routed through shell companies. I'm tracking about 2.8 million so far. Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, engine still idling. How much more time do you need? Brett's keyboard clattered in the background. 3 weeks, maybe 4. I need to trace the full network, get documentation that'll hold up in court. If we move too fast, he'll just bury everything and lawyer up. A pause then. Nathan, if he figures out someone's investigating, this could get dangerous. People don't embezzle this much without having contingency plans. Nathan thought about the photo on his dresser, about professional surveillance, about how Richard had already demonstrated willingness to threaten a child. He already knows someone's a problem. He just doesn't know we're building a case. After they hung up, Nathan sat in the school parking lot and watched other parents drive away to their ordinary lives, their ordinary problems. He thought about the meeting with Victoria yesterday, about the black SUV, about how agreeing to help her had pulled him into something far larger than 3 conversations in a coffee shop. Brett needed 3 weeks. Nathan had promised Victoria 2 more meetings. The math didn't align, which meant someone would have to hold the line while the investigation progressed. That afternoon, Nathan's doorbell rang at 4:15. He opened it to find Garrett on the porch, his teacher's casual Friday clothes jeans and a flannel shirt, somehow making him look older than 40. His expression carried news he didn't want to deliver. Nathan stepped aside without speaking, led his brother into the living room. Emma was at a friend's house until 6, which meant whatever Garrett had come to say, it was something he didn't want her to hear. Garrett settled onto the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I got a visit at school today, during my lunch period. Man in an expensive suit introduced himself as a consultant for Whitmore Properties. Nathan's stomach dropped, anticipation and dread mixing. Richard Blackwood. Garrett nodded. He was very polite, very professional. Talked about the school's budget shortfalls, about how Hartford County teachers are underpaid. Then he mentioned that I have $72,000 in student loan debt. His jaw tightened, anger bleeding through the careful control. He offered me $60,000. Called it a consulting fee. All I had to do was convince my brother to stop associating with Victoria Whitmore. The audacity of it struck Nathan like cold water. Richard hadn't just threatened, he'd researched, calculated, identified pressure points. Garrett's debt was public record for anyone who knew where to look, and Richard had found it weaponized. It delivered it wrapped in the language of opportunity. Nathan's voice came out flat. What did you tell him? Garrett's laugh was sharp and humorless. I told him that my brother's integrity isn't for sale, and neither is mine. Then I suggested he leave before I called school security. He leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. Nathan, this guy's dangerous. He researched my finances, came to my workplace, tried to buy me off, and when I refused, he just smiled and said he hoped I'd reconsider. Like he expected rejection and had already moved on to Plan B. Nathan walked to the window, looking out at the street where afternoon sun created long shadows across lawns. Plan B. Whatever Richard had prepared next, it would escalate. The surveillance had failed to deter. The photo had prompted investigation rather than retreat. Approaching Garrett had backfired. Richard was running out of subtle options, which meant the next move would be considerably less subtle. He turned back to his brother. I need you to document everything. What he said, when, exactly how he phrased the offer. Write it down tonight while the memory's fresh. Garrett pulled out his phone. Already did. Sent myself an email from the parking lot with timestamps. He met Nathan's eyes, concern overriding any pretense of calm. What are you into here? Nathan considered how much to share, how much exposure to give his brother. But Garrett was already involved, already targeted, already standing in the blast radius of whatever Richard planned next. Withholding information wouldn't protect him, it would just leave him unprepared. He sat in the armchair across from Garrett and laid it out. The embezzlement, Brett's investigation, Victoria's arranged marriage that Richard needed to happen to cover his tracks, the listening devices, the surveillance, the systematic elimination of anyone who might interfere with Richard's plan. When Nathan finished, Garrett sat silent for a long moment, processing. Finally, you're going to take him down. It wasn't a question. Nathan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of commitment settle deeper. Brett needs 3 weeks. Victoria needs time to figure out what she wants. I just need to keep everyone safe until the pieces fall into place. Garrett stood, moved to the window beside Nathan. You know this isn't just about Victoria anymore. Richard threatened Emma tried to buy me. Probably has people watching your house right now. Even if you walk away, he's not going to just let it go. The truth of that struck hard. Nathan had been operating under the assumption that he could control his exposure, that 3 meetings and then distance would resolve the situation. But Richard had already demonstrated that distance meant nothing. The threat existed independent of Nathan's choices now. Walking away wouldn't eliminate it, it would just mean facing it alone. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Need to see you, important, please. Nathan showed the message to Garrett, who read it and grimaced. Second meeting already. Nathan checked the time. Emma would be home in 90 minutes. He typed back, my house, 6:30. Keep it brief. To Garrett, can you stay? I don't want Emma alone when Victoria's here. Garrett's agreement came without hesitation. I'll take her upstairs. Give you privacy. Victoria arrived at 6:28, her Mercedes pulling into the driveway with the precision of someone who'd been watching the clock as carefully as Nathan. She wore different clothes than yesterday, a cream sweater and dark pants that suggested she'd come from the office, but had stopped being the CEO somewhere between downtown Hartford and West Hartford. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been making difficult decisions and hadn't slept afterward. Nathan opened the door before she knocked, gestured her inside. The house suddenly felt smaller with her in it, her presence carrying the weight of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions into a space designed for homework and bedtime stories. He led her to the kitchen, the most neutral room where coffee was already brewing, and the evening light through the window created the illusion of normalcy. Victoria settled into one of the kitchen chairs, her hands folded on the table. I did the assignment, chose one thing I wanted to do. Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her, and Victoria's smile was small but genuine. I went to the grocery store, by myself. No assistant, no list, no plan. Just walked through the aisles and bought things that looked interesting. She pulled out her phone, showed him a photo of her kitchen counter covered in random items, a pineapple, 3 different kinds of cheese, a houseplant, cookies shaped like dinosaurs. I spent 45 minutes just looking at produce. It was the most peaceful 45 minutes I've had in years. Nathan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of how profoundly Victoria's life had been controlled when grocery shopping counted as rebellion. He thought about the list she'd made yesterday, every item marked as obligation, and understood that this small act of choosing what to buy represented something larger, the first crack in the foundation of a life built entirely on other people's expectations. He sat across from her, hands wrapped around his own coffee. How did it feel? Victoria's expression turned contemplative, searching for language to describe something new. Like I was watching someone else's life. Like I'd stepped into a movie where the protagonist was just a normal person doing normal things. She paused, vulnerability creeping into her voice. I bought the dinosaur cookies because they made me smile. That's it. No other reason. And for about 10 seconds, I felt like maybe that was enough. Nathan absorbed this, the weight of her confession settling between them. He thought about Emma asking yesterday if he'd ever met anyone like Mrs. Whitmore before, that 9-year-old radar picking up on something significant without understanding what. He thought about the surveillance, about Richard, about how this small victory of grocery shopping was happening inside a larger war Victoria didn't fully comprehend yet. His voice came gentle but firm. There's something you need to know. Richard Blackwood approached my brother today. Offered him $60,000 to convince me to stop seeing you. Victoria's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips, her face going pale. Garrett, your brother. Nathan nodded. High school teacher, student loan debt. Richard did his research, found the pressure point, made the offer. Victoria set the cup down carefully, her hands shaking slightly. What did Garrett say? Nathan felt pride mixed with worry. He refused. But Victoria, this means Richard's escalating. He's not just watching anymore, he's actively trying to separate us. Which means he's scared. Which means whatever you've uncovered, it's bigger than just financial irregularities. Victoria pulled out her phone, navigated to a folder of documents. I've been digging deeper. The external audits I authorized. They start in 3 weeks. Richard knows this. He's been trying to delay them, citing budget concerns and scheduling conflicts, but I pushed them through. She slid the phone across the table, showing Nathan spreadsheets with highlighted discrepancies. If I'm right about the embezzlement, the auditors will find it immediately. Richard has 3 weeks to either stop the audits or make sure I'm not in a position to authorize them. Nathan studied the numbers, his architect's training giving him just enough financial literacy to recognize the patterns. Money flowing out in irregular amounts, ghost contractors that existed only on paper, invoices that didn't match actual construction costs. Brett had been tracking this from the outside. Victoria had found it from within. Together, they had enough to bury Richard Blackwood. But 3 weeks was a long time for a desperate man to act. Nathan handed the phone back. You need to be careful. If Richard suspects you know, Victoria cut him off, her voice carrying an edge of steel. I called my mother 2 days ago, told her I needed 6 months to think about the arrangement with Alexander Pennington. No wedding planning, no engagement announcements, just space. Nathan's eyebrows rose. This was faster than he'd expected, bolder than seemed wise given the surveillance and threats. How did Eleanor take it? Victoria's laugh came bitter. She threatened to cut me off financially, remove me as CEO, make it clear that defying the family has consequences. She met Nathan's eyes and he saw something new there, determination mixed with fear, but holding steady. I told her to do it, that I'd find my own way, that I was tired of being a chess piece in someone else's game. Nathan felt admiration spike despite his concerns. This was the woman who'd stood at the gala asking how to say no, and 2 weeks later she delivered the biggest no of her life to the person who'd controlled her since childhood. But admiration didn't erase the danger. Eleanor backing down meant Victoria had won the battle, but Richard would see it as losing control of his insurance policy. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. Eleanor actually backed down. Victoria nodded slowly. She said the company needs my reputation, my relationships with investors, that she couldn't afford to remove me right now. Something vulnerable crossed her face. For the first time in my life, I had leverage against my own mother. And I used it. The kitchen door creaked open, and both of them turned. Emma stood in the doorway, her backpack still on her face, showing surprise at finding a stranger in the kitchen. Garrett appeared behind her, his expression apologetic. He'd clearly intended to keep her upstairs longer. Emma's voice came cautious but curious. Daddy! Nathan stood, moving to his daughter with practiced ease. Emma, this is Ms. Whitmore. She works with Daddy on building projects. He kept his tone light, normal, giving Emma the space to approach at her own pace. Emma studied Victoria with that particular intensity children bring to new adults in their space. She didn't move closer, but she didn't retreat either. You're the lady Daddy's been helping. Victoria's surprise was visible. She hadn't expected Emma to know about her. But she recovered smoothly, offering a small smile. That's right. Your dad has been very kind. Emma set her backpack down, took 2 steps into the kitchen. Her gaze went to the coffee pot, to the 2 cups on the table, to Victoria's phone, still lying face up with its spreadsheets visible. Nathan watched his daughter process the scene with intelligence. Beyond her years, that careful observation he recognized from his own childhood. She'd learned early to read rooms, to understand when adults were discussing things that mattered. Her next words came soft, almost tentative. Are you okay? Victoria's breath caught, genuine surprise rippling across her face. Nathan saw the exact moment Victoria registered that Emma wasn't making conversation. She was asking a real question born from real perception. Emma had looked at this adult stranger and somehow intuited distress beneath the expensive clothes and composed exterior. Victoria's voice, when she answered, carried none of the boardroom authority, just honest uncertainty. I'm trying to be. It's been a difficult few weeks. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. She moved to the fridge, pulled out the carton of orange juice with the ease of someone completely comfortable in her own home. As she poured herself a glass, her voice drifted back over her shoulder, casual but pointed. You have sad eyes, like Daddy did when Mommy left. The kitchen went silent. Nathan felt his chest constrict, caught between wanting to redirect Emma and recognizing that his daughter had just articulated something he'd been trying not to see. Victoria's composure fractured her hands, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only solid thing in reach. Emma turned around, orange juice in hand, completely unaware that she detonated a bomb. But Daddy got better, so you probably will too. She took a sip, looked at Garrett. "Uncle Garrett, can we work on my science project?" Garrett nodded, relief clear that Emma was giving him an exit. "Absolutely. Let's head upstairs." He touched Nathan's shoulder as he passed a brief gesture of support, then guided Emma out of the kitchen. Nathan waited until he heard Emma's bedroom door close upstairs before looking back at Victoria. She had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent tears. He moved around the table, grabbed the box of tissues from the counter, set it within reach. He didn't touch her, didn't offer empty comfort, just gave her space to break down without audience. When Victoria finally looked up, her mascara had smeared her careful appearance, completely destroyed. Her voice came raw. "How does a 9-year-old see that?" Nathan sat back down, giving her the truth Emma deserved. "Because I let her. When Clarissa left, I didn't hide it from Emma. She was 4, but she knew something had broken. I cried in front of her. I let her see me struggling. Not to burden her, but because I didn't know how to hide that kind of pain and still be present for her." Victoria wiped at her eyes with a tissue, smearing the mascara further. "I've spent 36 years learning how to hide, how to perform, how to make sure no one ever sees the cracks." She laughed hollow and sharp. "And your 9-year-old daughter took one look and saw straight through me." Nathan felt the weight of that truth. Emma had seen Victoria's grief because Nathan had taught her unintentionally that adults carry pain too. That sadness wasn't something to be ashamed of or hidden away. That sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was let someone else witness their breaking. He kept his voice gentle. "Emma's been watching me rebuild for 5 years. She knows what it looks like when someone's trying to put themselves back together." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She also knows the difference between people who are genuinely struggling and people who are performing struggle. Kids have radar for authenticity." Victoria nodded slowly, processing this. She pulled out another tissue, attempted to clean her face with limited success. When she spoke again, her voice carried a question she seemed afraid to ask. "Does it get better the way your daughter said?" Nathan thought about the first year after Clarissa left, the mornings he'd woken up in Emma's bed because she'd had nightmares about abandonment, and he'd fallen asleep reading stories until she felt safe. He thought about the promotions he'd declined, the relationships he'd avoided, the walls he'd built brick by careful brick. He thought about whether better was the right word for what he'd achieved or if functional was more accurate. His answer came honest. It gets different. The pain doesn't disappear, but you learn to build a life around it. You learn what matters and what doesn't. You learn to choose differently. He met her eyes across the table. "But Victoria, you can't do that while you're still living the life that broke you. You have to actually leave. Not just think about leaving, actually do it." Victoria absorbed this, her fingers tracing patterns on the coffee mug. "I bought dinosaur cookies and went to a grocery store. That's not exactly revolution." Nathan's expression didn't change. "It's a start, but starting isn't finishing. Eleanor threatened to cut you off and you called her bluff. That's bigger than cookies. That's foundation." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the firmness he used when Emma needed to hear difficult truths. "But Richard's not your mother. He's not going to back down because you have leverage. He's going to escalate until you're not a problem anymore." Victoria's face went still, fear displacing the vulnerability. "What do you think he'll do?" Nathan considered sugarcoating it, decided Victoria needed reality more than comfort. "I think he'll try to discredit you. Make it look like you're unstable, irrational, unable to lead the company. He'll manufacture a crisis that forces the board to choose between you and him. And he'll time it perfectly right before the audits, so there's maximum pressure to defer or cancel them." Victoria's breathing quickened, anxiety visibly mounting. "How do I stop him?" Nathan felt the familiar weight of being asked to solve problems that weren't his to solve. "You don't stop him. You prepare for him. You document everything, you secure allies on the board, you make sure that when he makes his move, you're ready to counter." He paused, then added the harder truth. "And you accept that when this goes bad, it's going to get ugly. Richard has everything to lose. People with everything to lose don't fight fair." Victoria's hands shook as she picked up her coffee, took a long drink despite it having gone cold. When she set the cup down, her voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Nathan thought about Emma upstairs, about the photo still in his dresser drawer, about Garrett being approached with bribes, about how strength wasn't something you had or didn't have. It was something you found when the alternative was surrender. He met Victoria's gaze directly. Strength isn't what you feel. It's what you do when you don't feel strong at all. They sat in silence while the kitchen darkened around them, the December evening stealing the last of the natural light. Finally, Victoria stood gathering her things with movements that suggested exhaustion in every muscle. I should go. Emma needs dinner, and I've taken enough of your time. Nathan walked her to the door, both of them moving through his house like they were navigating a space that had become suddenly unfamiliar. On the porch, Victoria paused, her breath visible in the cold air. Thank you for the second meeting, for not turning me away when I showed up unannounced. Nathan's response came automatic. That wasn't the deal. 3 meetings, I said. That one didn't count. Victoria's surprise was genuine. Why not? Nathan considered the question, considered the hour they'd spent in his kitchen with Emma's observation hanging between them, considered how little they'd actually accomplished in terms of his assignment versus how much had shifted in ways he couldn't quantify. Because you came here with news, not questions. You came to tell me about your progress, not ask for help figuring out what to do next. He shrugged slightly. That's not a meeting. That's an update. Victoria's smile was small but real. So I still have 2 meetings left. Nathan felt something in his chest respond to that smile, some part of him that had been dormant for 5 years stirring to life. He shut it down immediately, reinforced the walls, reminded himself why boundaries existed. 2 meetings, use them wisely. After Victoria drove away, Nathan went upstairs to find Emma working on her science project while Garrett supervised from the desk chair. Emma looked up when Nathan entered, her expression carrying that particular seriousness she wore when processing something complex. Her voice came soft. Daddy, Miss Victoria's in trouble, isn't she? Nathan sat on the edge of Emma's bed across from where she'd spread poster board and markers across the floor. What makes you think that? Emma set down her marker, met his eyes with an intensity that reminded Nathan she was watching everything, processing, everything, understanding more than he gave her credit for. She came to our house. That's not normal for work people. And she was really so, even though she tried to hide it. And you looked worried when you were talking to her. Nathan felt the familiar tension between protecting Emma's innocence and respecting her intelligence. She'd already observed too much to be deflected with easy lies. He chose his words carefully. Ms. Whitmore is dealing with some difficult people who don't want her to make her own choices. Daddy's trying to help her figure out how to stand up for herself. Emma processed this, her 9-year-old mind working through implications. Like when Sarah's mom wouldn't let her try out for soccer because she said girls should do dance instead. Nathan felt a smile pull at his mouth despite the darkness of the actual situation. Similar, but bigger stakes. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense, then returned her attention to her poster. But before Nathan could stand to leave, her voice drifted up again, casual but pointed. I like her. She seems nice, even with sad eyes. Nathan's chest tightened, affection and fear mixing in equal measure. She is nice. Emma glanced up, her expression carrying something that looked almost like hope. Will she come back? Nathan thought about surveillance, about Richard's escalation, about 3 meetings, and whatever came after. I don't know, sweetheart. Emma accepted this with the resilience of a child who'd learned early that adults couldn't always control outcomes. She went back to her poster, and Nathan returned downstairs to find Garrett had come down to the kitchen, was examining the 2 coffee cups still sitting on the table. Garrett's voice carried no judgment, just observation. She got to you. Nathan didn't bother denying it. Emma's right. She's in trouble, real trouble, and I'm in a position to help. Garrett leaned against the counter, arms crossed. That's not what I meant. I meant she got to you, past the walls. You're involved now, not just helping. Nathan felt the accuracy of that strike home. He thought about watching Victoria break down at his kitchen table, about the way her vulnerability had felt like trust rather than manipulation, about how her grocery shopping triumph had made him want to protect that fragile new growth. He thought about the 5 years he'd spent avoiding exactly this, the complicated entanglement of care and responsibility, the way helping someone could slip into needing them, the risk of letting someone close enough to matter. His response came quiet. I know. Garrett studied his brother for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Just don't lose yourself in saving her. Emma needs you present, not distracted by someone else's crisis. Nathan absorbed the warning, recognized the wisdom in it. But he also recognized that Emma had just told him she liked Victoria, that his daughter had somehow given permission he hadn't realized he was waiting for. The situation remained complicated, dangerous, full of potential for disaster. But somewhere in the complexity, a door had opened that Nathan couldn't quite bring himself to close. The next 4 weeks passed in a strange dual existence. Nathan maintained his routine work, Emma's school dinners and homework, and the careful rhythm of single parenting. But underneath the surface, he was tracking Victoria's transformation through brief text updates and the occasional photos she'd send of small victories. A therapist's office building, a farmer's market where she'd bought ingredients and cooked her first meal alone, a coffee shop where she'd sat reading for 2 hours with no agenda. Brett called weekly with investigation updates, his reports growing more detailed as he untangled Richard's financial web. The embezzlement total had climbed to $3 million spread across 6 years and dozens of ghost accounts. Brett had documentation, paper trails, enough evidence to trigger federal charges. But he needed more time to identify everyone involved to make sure Richard couldn't deflect blame onto subordinates. Nathan watched Victoria change through the updates like watching time-lapse photography of a plant growing toward light. She'd reconnected with Jameson, her brother in Oregon, flying out for a long weekend that she described in a text as the first honest conversation we've had in 8 years. She'd started seeing a therapist twice a week, working through what she called 36 years of performing instead of living. She'd declined 4 different men who'd asked her out, recognizing she wasn't ready to add romance to a life she was still learning to inhabit. She'd also moved, not to a bigger penthouse or a different prestigious address, but to a 2-bedroom apartment in West Hartford, 3 miles from Nathan's house. The text announcing it had come with a photo of her standing in an empty living room. Walls bare, a single armchair. The only furniture, bought my first piece of furniture today. Chose it because it looked comfortable, not because a designer told me it matched my aesthetic. Feels revolutionary. Nathan had stared at that photo longer than was wise, at Victoria's genuine smile, at the way she looked simultaneously lost and liberated in that empty room. He'd thought about responding with something meaningful, had typed and deleted 3 different messages, finally settled on, "That's progress. Proud of you." But underneath the transformation, Richard Blackwood was moving pieces into position. Nathan felt it in the increased surveillance. Different vehicles, rotating patterns, professional precision that suggested Richard had upgraded his resources. Brett reported that several of Whitmore Properties board members had received visits from concerned investors asking questions about Victoria's leadership stability. The gossip mill in Hartford's professional community had started churning whispers about Victoria canceling her engagement, making erratic decisions, possibly struggling with the pressure of running a billion-dollar company. Then in the 4th week of Victoria's transformation, the hammer fell. Nathan woke to his phone buzzing with news alerts. The Hartford Business Journal had published a story sourced from anonymous insiders at Whitmore Properties. CEO Victoria Whitmore under scrutiny, board questions, leadership amid personal crisis. The article painted a picture of instability, canceled meetings, impulsive decisions, concerns about her mental state following the sudden termination of her engagement to Alexander Pennington. It cited unnamed board members who worried that Victoria's personal struggles were affecting her professional judgment. Nathan read the article standing in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, coffee brewing, Emma still asleep upstairs. The piece was carefully constructed, nothing explicitly false, but everything twisted to suggest incompetence. Victoria's 6-month thinking period became canceled engagement. Her external audit authorization became sudden decision without board consultation. Her therapy became proof of mental health concerns. Richard had manufactured his crisis, and he'd done it in the most public, damaging way possible. Nathan's phone rang before he'd finished the article. Victoria's voice came through, shaking but controlled. "You saw it?" Not a question. Nathan confirmed anyway. "Just read it. How bad is the board reaction?" Victoria's bitter laugh carried exhaustion and fury. "Emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eleanor's already sent 3 messages asking what I've done to embarrass the family. Richard's playing concerned lieutenant, suggesting maybe I need to step aside temporarily while I focus on personal wellness." Nathan heard the quotation marks in her voice, the way Richard's suggestions were wrapped in concern while being fundamentally hostile. "What are you going to do?" Victoria's silence stretched long enough that Nathan thought the connection had dropped. Then quiet but firm. I need meeting number 3, tonight, please. Nathan checked the time. Emma had school, he had work tonight, was Friday, and he'd promised Emma they'd watch a movie together. Every practical consideration screamed to say no, to maintain boundaries, to let Victoria handle her own crisis. But he heard the edge in her voice, the place where determination met desperation, and recognized the sound of someone standing at a cliff edge, trying to decide whether to jump or climb back to unsafe ground. His response came against his better judgment. Midnight, Franklin's Diner on Asylum Avenue. It'll be empty that late. Victoria's relief traveled through the phone like something physical. Thank you. Nathan spent the day in a fog of anticipation and dread. Work passed in a blur of structural calculations he couldn't focus on. Emma's school pickup felt mechanical. His responses to her chatter about her day automatic rather than engaged. Garrett came over for dinner, took one look at Nathan's face, and offered to stay late without being asked. At 11:40, Nathan kissed Emma goodnight, confirmed Garrett was settled on the couch with a book, and drove through empty Hartford streets to a diner that existed primarily for insomniacs and third-shift workers. Victoria's Mercedes was already in the parking lot when he arrived, and he found her in the farthest booth from the door, a cup of coffee in front of her that looked untouched. She'd been crying. The evidence was in her red-rimmed eyes, the tissue crumpled beside her in the coffee cup, the way her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around the ceramic. She looked up when Nathan slid into the booth across from her, and he saw something in her expression that reminded him of his own face in the mirror 5 years ago, the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting too long and wasn't sure they had any fight left. Nathan didn't wait for her to speak. Tell me where you are. Victoria's laugh came hollow. The board meets tomorrow morning. Eleanor called tonight. She's taking Richard's side. Says I'm damaging the family reputation with my erratic behavior. Says if I don't step down voluntarily, they'll vote me out. Her voice cracked slightly. Richard's won. He manufactured this crisis perfectly. By tomorrow afternoon, I'll be out as CEO, and the external audits will be canceled. Everything I've been working toward, every small victory, it doesn't matter. He's going to bury me. Nathan absorbed this, mapping the chessboard in his mind. Richard had played it brilliantly. The press coverage created public pressure. Eleanor's alliance gave him family support. The board meeting forced immediate action, didn't give Victoria time to prepare a counter. And removing Victoria as CEO would indeed eliminate the audit authorization, buying Richard enough time to hide evidence or flee. But Victoria was missing something crucial, something Nathan had learned from 5 years of single parenting and from Brett's investigation. She was playing Richard's game by Richard's rules. She'd been conditioned her whole life to operate within systems of power that someone else controlled. What she needed was to stop playing entirely. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. Tell me honestly, do you want to stay as CEO? Victoria's surprise was genuine. What? Nathan kept his voice level, pushing her toward a truth she was avoiding. Do you actually want to run Whitmore Properties? Or do you want it because it's all you've ever known? Because walking away would mean admitting defeat, because losing it would prove everyone right about you being unstable. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Her coffee sat forgotten as she struggled with the question. Nathan watched her face cycle through defensive responses, justifications, the automatic answers she'd been trained to give. He waited, giving her space to dig past the performance to whatever lay underneath. When she finally spoke, her voice came small and uncertain. I don't know. 2 months ago, I would have said running the company was my entire identity. But now, she trailed off, looked out the diner window at the empty parking lot. Now I'm not sure I even like the person I am as CEO. I'm good at it, but I'm not sure it makes me happy. Nathan felt something shift in the booth, a fundamental honesty emerging. Then why are you fighting to keep it? Victoria's eyes met his, and he saw tears threatening again. Because if I let Richard win, then everything I've done, leaving the engagement, telling off my mother, trying to build a real life, it was all for nothing. He gets to keep stealing, keep controlling, keep destroying people who get in his way. And I just give up. Nathan recognized the trap she was in, the way pride and principle had become tangled until she couldn't separate them. He thought about his own divorce, about the 6 months he'd spent trying to save a marriage that was already dead, Not because he loved Clarissa, but because admitting defeat felt like failure. He thought about the moment he had finally let go, finally accepted that sometimes walking away was the bravest choice available. His voice came quiet but firm. Victoria, I stayed in my marriage for 6 months after I knew it was over. 6 months of trying to fix something Clarissa had already decided was broken. I did it because I thought leaving meant I'd failed, meant I wasn't strong enough to make it work. He paused, making sure she was listening. Those 6 months were the worst of my life, not because of Clarissa, but because I was lying to myself every single day, pretending I could save something that didn't want to be saved. When I finally left, when I finally accepted that trying wasn't the same as succeeding, I felt like I could breathe again. Victoria's hands tightened around her coffee cup. You're saying I should give up. Nathan shook his head. I'm saying you need to know why you're fighting. Are you fighting for the company because you genuinely want to lead it and fix what's broken? Or are you fighting because letting Richard win feels like surrender? He leaned closer. Because if it's the second one, you're not fighting Richard. You're fighting yourself. And that's a battle you can't win. Victoria sat very still, absorbing this. Around them, the diner hummed with the quiet sounds of late-night operations, a cook scraping a griddle, the hiss of a coffee machine, the low murmur of a couple at the counter. Normal sounds, ordinary moments, the kind of peaceful existence Victoria had been trying to build before Richard had forced her hand. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, less defensive, more contemplative. Alexander called me yesterday, offered a compromise. Nathan felt his jaw tighten but stayed silent, letting her work through it. Victoria continued staring at her coffee. He suggested we do the engagement for show. No actual wedding, just an announcement that we're back together. It would satisfy everyone, my mother, his family, the board. Richard couldn't claim I'm unstable if I'm engaged to Alexander Pennington. The crisis would evaporate. She looked up, meeting Nathan's eyes. It would buy me time. I could keep the CEO position, keep the audits on track, expose Richard eventually. Everyone wins. Nathan studied her face, looking for what she wasn't saying. Except you'd be lying. To everyone, including yourself. Victoria's nod came slow. I'd be right back where I started. Maybe with a different timeline, maybe with a plan to escape later. But fundamentally, I'd still be performing. Still playing the role everyone expects. Her voice dropped to barely audible. Still the same person who asked you at a gala how to say no. Nathan felt the weight of this moment settle around them, understood that this was the real crisis. Not Richard's manufactured scandal, not the board meeting, not even the CEO position. The crisis was whether Victoria would choose the easy lie that preserved her position or the hard truth that might cost her everything. He spoke carefully, knowing his words carried weight he hadn't asked to bear. I can't make this choice for you. But I'll tell you this, when the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving, you'll know. When pretending starts hurting worse than being honest, you'll know. He paused, then added the truth she needed most. But Victoria, you're still asking permission. When you're truly ready, you won't ask. You'll just act. Victoria absorbed this, her breath coming shallow. She picked up her phone, stared at it for a long moment, then set it down and pulled up Alexander's number. Nathan watched her thumb hover over the call button, watched her face work through calculations and fears and possibilities. Then she put the phone face down on the table and met Nathan's eyes with something new in her expression. Not confidence, not courage, but the particular clarity that came from finally seeing a truth you'd been avoiding. Her voice, when she spoke, carried no tremor. I'm not calling him. I'm not doing the fake engagement. Tomorrow morning, I'm walking into that board meeting, and I'm going to tell them the truth that Richard Blackwood has been embezzling millions, that the external audits will prove it, and that any attempt to remove me before those audits complete is obstruction. She paused, then added with something that sounded almost like wonder. And if they fire me anyway, I'll survive. Because I'm not just a CEO. I'm a person who can choose what she wants. And what I want is to stop performing. Nathan felt pride surge through his chest, immediate and powerful. This was the woman Victoria had been searching for beneath 36 years of expectations and control. Not perfect, not fearless, but finally willing to choose truth over safety. His response came simple. That's the first real decision I've heard you make. Victoria's smile trembled at the edges. It's terrifying. Nathan's own smile matched hers. The bravest things usually are. They sat in the diner until 2 in the morning, Nathan helping Victoria prepare for the board meeting while exhaustion pressed against both of them. They mapped strategy, anticipated Richard's counters, built contingencies. But mostly Nathan bore witness, while Victoria talked through fears and hopes and the fragile new identity she was constructing from the ruins of her old life. When he finally drove home through empty streets, the sky just beginning to pale with pre-dawn light, Nathan felt something fundamental had shifted. Victoria had walked into that diner still trapped between her past and her future. She'd walked out with a choice, made a line, crossed a commitment to truth regardless of consequence. He let himself into his house, quietly found Garrett asleep on the couch with his book fallen onto the floor. Emma's door was closed, her breathing audible in the silence. Nathan stood in his living room looking at the life he'd built, safe, predictable, carefully bounded, and wondered if watching Victoria choose courage meant he'd eventually have to choose it too. But that was a question for another day. For now, he had a daughter to wake, breakfast to make, a normal Friday morning to navigate, while Victoria walked into a board meeting that would either vindicate her or destroy her. And Nathan would be waiting to find out which. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 in the morning, which meant Nathan woke at 6:30 to a text from Victoria. Walking in, whatever happens, thank you for teaching me what courage looks like. He stared at those words while Emma moved through her morning routine, oblivious to the fact that 3 miles away, a woman was about to either save herself or lose everything trying. Nathan made breakfast on autopilot, his mind calculating scenarios. If the board sided with Richard, Victoria would be removed as CEO before lunch. If she managed to hold him off, Richard would escalate to something worse. There was no scenario where this ended cleanly. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack already secured, her hair in the French braid Nathan had finally mastered after 2 years of YouTube tutorials. Her voice carried that particular 9-year-old brightness that suggested she'd finished her reading assignment early. "Daddy, you look worried." Nathan flipped the pancake, buying himself 3 seconds to construct an appropriate response. "Just thinking about work, sweetheart." Emma studied him with that intensity she'd inherited from no one. Nathan could identify some genetic gift for reading beneath surfaces. "Is it about Ms. Victoria?" Nathan's hand stilled on the spatula. He'd been careful not to mention Victoria's name around Emma since that kitchen meeting 4 weeks ago, had maintained the fiction that his stress was work-related rather than person-specific. But Emma had always been 3 steps ahead of whatever adults thought they were hiding. He set the pancake on her plate, met her eyes across the counter. "Yes, she has a big meeting today, important decisions." Emma poured syrup with the careful precision of someone who'd been told too many times that more wasn't always better. "I hope she's okay. She seemed really sad when she was here." Nathan felt his chest tighten, that particular ache of loving someone who saw too much and understood too clearly. "Me too, sweetheart." By 8:15, Nathan was at his desk at Morrison & Associates, ostensibly reviewing structural plans, but actually refreshing news sites every 3 minutes. The Hartford Business Journal had reporters who lived for board meeting drama. If something significant happened, they'd publish within the hour. At 8:43, his phone rang. Brett Sullivan's voice came through, urgent and electric. "Turn on Channel 3, now." Nathan pulled up the live stream on his computer, found himself watching breaking news footage of FBI agents entering the Whitmore Properties headquarters. The banner across the bottom read, "Federal investigation underway at major Hartford real estate firm." The reporter's voice carried that particular excitement journalists got when a story exploded beyond expectations. "Sources confirm that FBI agents have entered Whitmore Properties this morning with warrants related to an ongoing financial investigation. Details are still emerging, but we're hearing that at least one senior executive is being taken into custody." Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "They just arrested Richard. Middle of the board meeting. FBI walked in with warrants. I'm in shock." Brett's voice came through Nathan's phone, still pressed to his ear. "I gave everything to the FBI yesterday. Figured Victoria needed backup that wasn't dependent on board politics. They move fast." Nathan felt multiple emotions collide: relief, vindication, concern for Victoria, and underneath it all, a savage satisfaction that Richard Blackwood was finally facing consequences. He thought about the photo of Emma, about Garrett being offered bribes, about Victoria's listening devices and manufactured crisis. Justice arriving in the form of federal agents felt appropriate. His response to Brett came quiet. "Thank you for moving when you did." Brett's laugh carried exhaustion and triumph. "Thank Victoria. Her audit authorization gave the FBI probable cause. Without that, they'd still be gathering evidence next year." A pause, then, "Nathan, this is going to get messy. Federal investigations into this kind of money mean lawyers' depositions, media scrutiny. Victoria's going to need people who aren't afraid of that mess." Nathan absorbed the warning, understood what Brett wasn't quite saying. Standing by Victoria now meant accepting exposure to a legal circus that could last months. It meant his name appearing in news articles, his relationship with her, scrutinized Emma, potentially affected by the fallout. Every instinct he'd cultivated over 5 years screamed to step back, to maintain distance, to protect Emma from chaos he hadn't created. But he thought about Victoria walking into that board meeting alone, about her choosing truth when the easy lie was available, about courage, looking like a terrified woman doing the right thing anyway. His decision came clear: I'm not going anywhere. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of breaking news updates. Richard Blackwood arrested for embezzlement, wire fraud, obstruction of justice. Evidence of financial crimes spanning 6 years. $3.2 million traced to offshore accounts. Whitmore Properties stock dropped 8% in 30 minutes, then stabilized as investors processed that the corruption was being removed rather than exposed as systemic. At 11:30, Victoria called. Her voice carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been operating on adrenaline and had just hit the crash. "Can I see you? Not meeting number 3. Just, I need to see you." Nathan checked his calendar, the careful schedule he maintained to ensure Emma always came first. He had a client presentation at 2, pickup at 3:15, Emma's piano lesson at 4:30. The math didn't work for anything substantial. But he heard something in Victoria's voice that bypassed logic, that went straight to the part of him that recognized when someone needed witness more than solution. His response came against every practical consideration. "Emma's school. I'll be there at 3 for pickup. You can meet me in the parking lot. 20 minutes, that's all I can give you." Victoria's relief traveled through the phone like something physical. "Thank you, I'll be there." Nathan spent the afternoon distracted through his client presentation, his mind half on structural calculations and half on what Victoria might need to say. When he pulled into the elementary school parking lot at 10 minutes before 3, Victoria's Mercedes was already there, parked 3 spaces from the pickup zone. He approached her car and she rolled down the window. She looked simultaneously exhausted and electrified, like someone who'd run a marathon and couldn't quite believe they'd finished. Her makeup was smudged, suggesting she'd been crying, but her eyes were clear. Her first words came rushed, pressured. "You saved my company. You and Brett. The FBI agent told me they'd been watching Richard for weeks, but didn't have enough to move until your evidence connected everything. Without that, he would have gotten away with it." Nathan leaned against her car door, conscious of other parents beginning to arrive for pickup. "I didn't save anything. I just made sure there were consequences for threatening my daughter." Victoria shook her head, something fierce entering her expression. "You could have walked away after that first meeting. Could have said it wasn't your problem, wasn't your fight, but you didn't. You investigated, you built a case, you made sure Richard couldn't keep destroying people." Her voice cracked slightly. "You saved me even though I never asked you to, even though it put you at risk." Nathan felt the weight of her gratitude, understood she was processing trauma in real time and needed somewhere to put all the emotion. But he also recognized that letting her see him as savior would create a dynamic neither of them needed. He'd spent 5 years learning that healthy relationships were built on partnership, not rescue. He kept his voice level. "Victoria, I didn't save you. You saved yourself. You're the one who walked into that board meeting ready to tell the truth. You're the one who authorized audits despite pressure to back down. You're the one who chose courage over convenience." He paused, making sure she heard him. "I just made where Richard faced consequences. That's not rescue, that's accountability." Victoria absorbed this, tears threatening, but not falling. Around them, the school parking lot was filling with vehicles, parents checking phones and adjusting mirrors while waiting for the 3:15 bell. Normal afternoon routines, ordinary moments, the kind of peaceful existence Nathan had fought to build. Victoria's gaze tracked a young mother getting out of a minivan, helping a toddler from a car seat, while an older child bounced beside her. Something in Victoria's expression shifted, softened into something that looked almost like longing. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. What happens now with us, I mean? Nathan felt the question land in his chest like something with weight. He thought about 3 meetings about boundaries carefully maintained, about how those boundaries had started eroding the moment Emma had looked at Victoria and seen sadness. He thought about the walls he'd built and whether they still served their purpose or had become just another prison. But he also thought about Emma finishing her school day 30 feet away, about piano lessons and homework, and the careful routine that kept her world stable, about how wanting Victoria didn't erase his responsibility to his daughter, about how the bravest thing he could do right now was be honest rather than easy. His answer came careful, I don't know. You're going to be dealing with federal investigations, media scrutiny, rebuilding your company's reputation. That's going to take focus you won't have if you're trying to figure out what we are. He met her eyes directly. And I have Emma. Everything I do has to work around her needs first. Always. Victoria nodded slowly and Nathan saw understanding rather than disappointment. So we're done, 3 meetings, and then nothing. Nathan considered saying, yes, considered how clean that would be. But he thought about Victoria in his kitchen, about her crying over dinosaur cookies, about the way she'd looked in that empty apartment, choosing furniture for the first time. He thought about Emma saying she liked Ms. Victoria about his daughter, somehow giving permission he hadn't known he needed. His response surprised him even as he spoke it. The door's not closed, but I'm not opening it wider right now either. You need to figure out who you are without crisis defining you. I need to make sure Emma stays my priority. If something's meant to develop between us, it'll still be there when the timing's right. Victoria's smile trembled but held. That's fair. That's more than fair. She started her car, the engine purring to life. Nathan, thank you for not lying to me about what's possible. The 3:15 bell rang, children beginning to stream from the school's double doors. Nathan spotted Emma immediately, her backpack bouncing, as she walked with 2 friends toward the pickup zone. He stepped back from Victoria's car, giving her space to leave before Emma reached him. Victoria drove away without looking back, and Nathan moved to meet his daughter. Emma climbed into the car, chattering about a science experiment involving vinegar and baking soda, and Nathan let her voice wash over him while his mind processed what had just happened. He'd chosen honesty over possibility, boundaries over hope, and somehow that felt more like courage than any choice he'd made in years. 6 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of presence and absence. Nathan didn't hear from Victoria directly, but he tracked her transformation through news articles and social media. She'd stepped back from CEO to board chair, hired an external candidate to run day-to-day operations, while she focused on rebuilding company culture. She'd testified before a grand jury about Richard's crimes, her testimony described by reporters as measured and devastating. She'd reconnected publicly with Jameson, her brother photographed with her at a charity event in Portland, the caption noting their reconciliation after years of estrangement. Brett kept Nathan updated on the investigation's progress. Richard had pled not guilty, was out on bail awaiting trial, had hired a legal team famous for defending white-collar criminals. The case would take months to resolve, maybe years. But the evidence was overwhelming, and prosecutors were confident about conviction. Nathan fell back into his routine work, Emma, the careful architecture of single parenting. But something had shifted in how he inhabited that routine. He noticed himself being present rather than just going through motions. He noticed Emma watching him with that perceptive gaze she'd inherited from nowhere he could identify, as if she were waiting for something to change. One Saturday morning in late January, Emma asked to go to the farmer's market downtown. Nathan agreed, welcoming the excuse to get out of the house. They walked through stalls of winter vegetables and artisan bread, Emma excited about everything, Nathan content to follow her enthusiasm. Then he saw Victoria. She was standing at a produce stand 3 vendors down, examining apples with the concentration of someone who'd learned to care about choosing well. She wore jeans and a heavy coat, her hair pulled back, simply looking like someone who'd learned to blend into normal rather than stand above it. Nathan's first instinct was to redirect Emma to avoid the encounter, to maintain the distance he'd been carefully preserving. But Emma spotted her first, her voice carrying bright across the market space. Ms. Victoria turned surprise, and something like joy crossing her face as Emma ran toward her. Nathan followed at a slower pace, watching Victoria kneel to Emma's level, watching his daughter's animated explanation of the science project she'd been working on. By the time Nathan reached them, they were deep in conversation about baking soda volcanoes and whether food coloring made the lava more realistic. Victoria looked up as Nathan approached, and he saw something in her expression that punched through his careful defenses. Not need, not desperation, just genuine happiness at seeing him. She stood brushing off her knees, her smile uncertain, but real. Her greeting came simple. Nathan, it's good to see you. Nathan felt Emma watching them both, that 9-year-old radar tracking adult dynamics with uncomfortable precision. He kept his voice neutral. Victoria, how are you? Victoria's laugh carried self-awareness rather than bitterness. Better, different, learning what normal feels like. She glanced at Emma, then back to Nathan. I've been in therapy 3 times a week, working through everything. It's been hard, but necessary. Emma tugged Nathan's sleeve, her voice stage whisper loud. Daddy, can Miss Victoria help us pick strawberries? She seems like she'd be good at it. Nathan met Victoria's eyes, saw her waiting for his permission rather than assuming it was given. That small gesture, respecting his boundaries, even in this casual encounter, made something in his chest loosen. He nodded slowly, and Victoria's relief was visible. They spent 20 minutes together at various market stalls, Emma maintaining an enthusiastic monologue while Nathan and Victoria navigated careful small talk. Victoria shared about her brother visiting for New Year's, about selling her penthouse and moving to a neighborhood where she could walk to grocery stores. Nathan mentioned Emma's upcoming birthday, the elaborate scavenger hunt party she'd requested. When they finished shopping, Emma bouncing ahead toward the parking lot, Victoria touched Nathan's arm gently. Her voice dropped low enough that Emma wouldn't hear. Thank you for not avoiding me. I know that would have been easier. Nathan studied her face, looking for the desperate woman who'd broken down at a gala 2 months ago. He found someone quieter, steadier, still learning, but no longer drowning. You look good, like you're finding what you were looking for. Victoria's smile turned contemplative. I'm finding pieces. Building from scratch is slower than I expected. She paused, vulnerability creeping into her expression. I miss talking to you, not the crisis conversations, just talking. Nathan felt the pull of that confession, the way it resonated with his own experience of the last 6 weeks. He'd missed her too, not the chaos, not the drama, but the conversations that had pushed him to examine his own walls. But missing someone didn't erase practical considerations. Emma came first, always. His response came carefully measured. I miss talking to you too. But Victoria, I meant what I said. Emma's my priority. Anything else has to fit around that, not the other way around. Victoria nodded, no argument in her posture. I understand. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. They parted at the parking lot, Emma waving enthusiastically while Nathan loaded grocery bags. As he drove away, Emma's voice drifted from the back seat, casual but pointed. I like her, Daddy. She's nice now, not as sad. Nathan met his daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, saw something that looked almost like hope in her expression. She's been working on herself. That's good. Emma returned her attention to the window, but her next words carried that particular weight of a child testing boundaries. Do you think she'll come around more? Nathan felt the question settle into places he'd been trying to keep closed. I don't know, sweetheart. That's complicated. Emma accepted this with the resilience of someone who'd learned early that adults couldn't always control outcomes. But Nathan saw her smile slightly, as if his non-answer was answer enough. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening after Nathan had put Emma to bed, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. A woman's voice came through, careful and practiced. Nathan, it's Clarissa. Nathan's entire body went rigid, 5 years of careful distance, collapsing in an instant. His ex-wife, the woman who'd walked out when Emma was 4, who'd signed away custody without hesitation, who'd become a ghost in their lives, except for 2 brief phone calls in 5 years. He'd assumed she'd stay gone, had built his entire existence around that assumption. His response came cold. What do you want? Clarissa's careful tone held something Nathan recognized as rehearsed apology. I've been following you on social media. I saw the news articles about you being connected to the Whitmore Properties investigation. I saw you're dating a billionaire now. Nathan's jaw tightened, fury building fast. I'm not dating anyone. And what I do with my life stopped being your concern when you signed away your rights to Emma. Clarissa pushed forward, her voice taking on that particular quality she used when she wanted something. I made mistakes, Nathan. I was young, I was scared, I didn't know what I was doing. But I've grown up, I've changed, and I want to reconnect with Emma. She's my daughter too. Nathan moved to his living room window, staring out at the dark street where streetlights cast pools of yellow on wet pavement. Rage and disbelief mixed until he couldn't separate them. You haven't called Emma in 3 years. You missed her 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th birthdays. You've sent exactly 0 cards, 0 gifts, 0 indication that you remember she exists. And now you want to reconnect. Clarissa's voice hardened, the apologetic tone dropping away to reveal calculation underneath. I can cause legal problems, Nathan. Custody agreements can be revisited. Courts favor maternal involvement. If you make this difficult, I have lawyers who'll make it very difficult for you. Nathan felt cold settle into his bones, the particular chill of recognizing a threat wrapped in concern. Clarissa had heard about Victoria, had heard about money, had made the calculation that Nathan's life had value worth extracting. This wasn't about Emma. It had never been about Emma. It was about opportunity. His response came flat and final. Do what you need to do. But understand this, I have 5 years of documentation showing you abandoned your daughter. 5 years of Emma asking why you don't call. 5 years of me being the only parent who showed up. You take me to court, and every single instance of your absence becomes public record. Every birthday you missed, every promise you broke, every way you chose yourself over your child. Is that really the fight you want? Clarissa's silence stretched long enough that Nathan thought she'd hung up. Then quieter. I just wanted a chance. Nathan's laugh came hollow. You had chances, every day for 4 years. You chose not to take them. He ended the call, stood holding his phone while rage slowly gave way to something colder, the understanding that Clarissa's reappearance meant his carefully constructed peace was under threat from yet another direction. He walked upstairs, moving quietly past Emma's room. She was asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, completely unaware that her mother had just tried to weaponize their relationship for financial gain. Nathan stood in her doorway, watching her breathe, feeling the familiar ache of fierce protectiveness mixed with exhaustion. A sound from the hallway made him turn. Emma stood there in her pajamas, her eyes wide, with that particular awareness that meant she'd been awake, had heard at least part of his phone conversation. Nathan's stomach dropped, calculations racing about how much she'd heard and how to frame it. Emma's voice came small. Was that Mommy? Nathan felt everything in him want to lie, to protect, to shield Emma from this particular pain. But he'd learned 5 years ago that children knew when adults were performing truth versus speaking it. He moved to her, knelt so they were eye level, kept his voice gentle. Yes, that was your mom. She wants to see you. Emma's expression cycled through emotions Nathan couldn't fully read. Surprise, confusion, something that looked almost like fear. She didn't move closer, didn't retreat, just stood processing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the hope Nathan had dreaded. I don't want to see her. Nathan felt relief and sadness mix in his chest. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. Emma's next words came firmer, more certain. I don't want to see her, ever. She left us. She didn't call on my birthdays. She doesn't get to come back just because she feels like it. Tears threatened at her eyes, anger and hurt visible in her 9-year-old face. I have you. I don't need her. Nathan pulled Emma into a hug, feeling her shake slightly against his chest. He thought about all the ways Clarissa had damaged his daughter just by being absent, by making Emma believe maternal love was conditional and temporary. He thought about the walls he'd built to protect them both, and how those walls had cost him connection, but had kept Emma safe enough to say no to someone who'd hurt her. After Emma calmed and returned to bed, Nathan sat in his darkened living room and let himself feel the full weight of the day. Clarissa's return wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder that the past never stayed buried as cleanly as you hoped. It was evidence that no amount of careful construction could protect against people who decided you had something worth taking. But underneath the fear and anger, Nathan recognized something else. Emma had rejected Clarissa without hesitation. His daughter, who'd spent years asking why her mother didn't call, had just said she didn't need her. That wasn't Nathan's influence, that was Emma making her own choice, recognizing on some fundamental level that people who left didn't get automatic forgiveness just because they returned. His daughter was stronger than he'd realize, which meant maybe possibly she didn't need as much protection as he'd been providing. Maybe the walls he'd built were keeping out more than danger. Maybe it was time to consider what opening up might look like. Nathan pulled out his phone, stared at Victoria's number for a long moment, then typed before he could overthink it. "Can we talk? Not about crisis, just talk." Victoria's response came within a minute. Yes, when Nathan considered timing, considered Emma's piano lesson tomorrow, and his work schedule, and all the practical considerations that usually governed his choices. Then he thought about his daughter saying she didn't need Clarissa, about Victoria at the farmer's market, looking steady and real, about how the bravest choices were usually the ones that scared you. His response came against 5 years of careful caution. "Tomorrow night, after Emma's asleep, I'll come to you." The next evening, after piano lessons and dinner and bedtime stories, Nathan asked Garrett to come over. His brother arrived without question, settled onto the couch with understanding in his expression. Garrett's voice carried no judgment. "You're going to see her?" Nathan nodded, pulling on his jacket. "Just to talk, figure out what this is." Garrett smiled slightly. "It's about time. Emma's been asking about her every week." Nathan's surprise must have shown because Garrett continued. "She asked me when you're not around, whether Ms. Victoria is nice, whether I think she likes kids, whether you're going to date again." He leaned back, expression turning serious. "Your daughter's ready for you to move on, Nathan. Question is whether you are." Nathan absorbed this process that Emma had been tracking his potential for connection while he'd been busy maintaining walls. He thought about her rejection of Clarissa, about her certainty that she had what she needed, about how maybe part of what she needed was seeing him whole rather than just safe. His response came quiet. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I think I need to find out." Victoria's apartment was in a modest building 3 miles from Nathan's house, the kind of place where young families and graduate students lived, rather than billionaire CEOs. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her apartment behind her, spare but comfortable furniture chosen for use rather than appearance. Books stacked on surfaces, evidence of a life being built from scratch. They sat in her living room with coffee. Neither of them particularly wanted the awkwardness of the first few minutes giving way to something that felt almost like relief. Victoria talked about therapy, about learning to identify what she wanted versus what she'd been trained to want. Nathan shared about Emma's rejection of Clarissa, about recognizing that his daughter was stronger than his fear. An hour passed without either of them noticing conversation flowing in the way it had during those 3 meetings, but without the pressure of crisis driving it. They talked about books and music and childhood memories, normal things that built connection through small accumulations rather than dramatic revelations. Nathan found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years, walls lowering without conscious decision. Finally, when the coffee had gone cold and the hour had stretched past 11, Nathan voiced the question that had been building all evening. "Victoria, I need to know what you want, not what you think you should want, not what works best logistically. What do you actually want?" Victoria set her coffee cup down carefully, her expression turning contemplative. When she spoke, her voice carried hard-won clarity. "I want to know if what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude. I want to not rush into anything because rushing got me into arranged marriages and performances. I want to build something slowly, carefully with someone who sees me rather than my bank account or my last name." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "I want to see if what's between us can survive normalcy. If you can like the person I'm becoming when crisis isn't defining us." Nathan felt the honesty of that land in his chest, recognized it as matching his own fears and hopes. "I don't fit into your world, Victoria. I'm a single dad who eats dinner at 6 and goes to bed at 10. I can't do black tie galas and society events. I can't be the person who looks good on your arm at charity functions." Victoria leaned forward, something fierce entering her expression. "I don't want that world. I've spent 2 months dismantling it piece by piece. What I want is this coffee in a quiet apartment, conversations that matter, someone who challenges me to be better without trying to control me." Her voice dropped lower, vulnerability bleeding through. I don't need someone who fits into my old life. I need someone who helps me build a new one that's actually mine. Nathan absorbed this feeling. The truth of it resonate against his own experience of rebuilding. He thought about Emma upstairs with Garrett, about how his daughter had essentially given permission for this exploration. He thought about the walls he'd maintained and whether they'd kept him safe or just kept him alone. His next words came against every defensive instinct. I'm terrified, Victoria, that this will fall apart and Emma will get hurt, that you'll realize you want something different than what I can offer, that I'll open up and you'll close down. He paused, forcing himself to complete the thought. That I'm not enough for someone who could have anyone. Victoria's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. I'm terrified, too, that I'll slip back into performing, that I'll disappoint you, that the person I'm becoming won't be interesting enough to keep your attention. She reached across the space between them, her hand stopping just short of his. But Nathan, you're the first person who made me want to be brave instead of safe. That has to mean something. Nathan looked at her hand at the gap between them that represented 5 years of walls and 2 months of transformation and all the fear that lived in the space between wanting and having. He thought about Emma saying she liked Miss Victoria. He thought about Garrett saying his daughter was ready for him to move on. He thought about Victoria at the farmer's market, steady and real, and choosing growth over convenience. Then he closed the distance, his hand covering hers. The gesture was small, but it felt like jumping off a cliff the moment after you've committed but before you know if you'll fly or fall. Victoria's fingers tightened around his, and Nathan felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Not safety, not certainty, but the fragile possibility that maybe courage looked like trying despite the fear. His voice came quiet but firm. If we do this, we do it slow. Emma comes first, always. No negotiation on that. Victoria nodded immediately. I wouldn't want it any other way. Nathan continued, needing to establish boundaries even as he lowered them. And if she's not comfortable, if this affects her negatively at all, we stop. No matter how we feel, Emma's well-being is the priority. Victoria's agreement came without hesitation. Agreed. Completely. Nathan felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. Okay, then let's figure out what this looks like, carefully, one step at a time. Victoria's smile trembled, but held. One step at a time. They talked until past midnight, mapping what slow might mean dinners once a week, while Emma was at friends' houses, text conversations that didn't require immediate response space to process without pressure. They agreed not to involve Emma until they were certain this had potential to last, not to risk her attachment to something that might fracture. When Nathan finally drove home through empty streets, the dashboard clock reading 1:15, he felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. He'd said yes to possibility after 5 years of automatic no. He'd chosen risk over safety. And somehow, terrifyingly, that felt more like living than anything he'd done since Clarissa left. The next 8 weeks passed in a slow dance of connection and caution. Nathan and Victoria had dinner every Thursday while Emma stayed with Garrett. They texted throughout days, but never about anything urgent, just small observations and shared thoughts. They talked about everything except the future, both of them learning each other in present tense rather than potential. Nathan watched Victoria continue her transformation, observed how therapy and intention were reshaping her from someone who performed into someone who simply existed. She started mentoring young women in business, using her experience to help others navigate corporate politics. She took a pottery class and was terrible at it, but kept going because the process mattered more than the product. She learned to cook badly and laugh about it rather than hire someone to fix the problem. Victoria watched Nathan slowly lower his walls, saw him practice vulnerability in small doses. He talked about his marriage ending, about the 6 months of trying to save something already dead, about learning that sometimes love meant knowing when to let go. He introduced her to Garrett properly, let them have conversations without Nathan mediating. He showed her photos of Emma at various ages, sharing his daughter's history in careful increments. In the 10th week, Emma asked directly during breakfast, "Daddy, are you dating Miss Victoria?" Nathan set his coffee down carefully, meeting his daughter's eyes across the table. He'd been expecting this question, but hadn't prepared an answer, had been hoping to delay until certainty replaced possibility. But Emma deserved honesty more than comfortable timing. His response came measured. "I've been spending time with her, getting to know her better. Would that be okay with you?" Emma considered this with the gravity only a 9-year-old could muster. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Is she nice to you?" Nathan felt his chest tighten at the question, at his daughter's protective instinct. "Very nice. She asks about you. She wants to make sure you're comfortable with this." Emma nodded, slowly processing. "Can I meet her? Like actually meet her, not just see her in the kitchen." Nathan realized this was permission offered freely and felt gratitude mixed with continued fear. "If you want to, but only when you're ready. No pressure." Emma's smile was small but genuine. "I think I'm ready." They arranged a Saturday afternoon at a neutral location, the science museum Emma loved, where the focus could be on exhibits rather than awkward conversation. Victoria arrived exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, carrying a small gift bag she handed to Emma with obvious nervousness. Emma opened it to find a book about female architects throughout history, and her face lit up in genuine delight. "This is so cool, thank you." Victoria's relief was visible, her smile turning real. "Your dad mentioned you like building things. I thought you might enjoy reading about women who built things for real." They spent 2 hours wandering through exhibits, Emma maintaining an enthusiastic monologue, while Victoria asked questions that suggested genuine interest rather than performance. Nathan watched them interact, saw his daughter slowly warm from polite to authentic, saw Victoria respond with patience rather than trying too hard. By the time they left, Emma was holding Victoria's hand, unself-consciously explaining her theory about why dinosaurs were actually still alive in deep ocean trenches. In the parking lot, Emma looked up at Victoria with that direct gaze she inherited from no one Nathan could identify. "Will you come to my piano recital next month?" Victoria glanced at Nathan, seeking permission. He nodded slightly, and Victoria looked back at Emma with a smile that carried real warmth. "I would love to." Emma beamed, then ran ahead to their car. Nathan lingered with Victoria for a moment, finding words inadequate for what he wanted to express. Finally, he settled on simple truth. "Thank you for being patient with her, for letting her set the pace." Victoria's eyes glistened slightly. "She's remarkable, Nathan. You've done an incredible job raising her, huh?" Nathan felt pride and fear mix in his chest. "She likes you. That's not something she gives easily." Victoria's voice dropped to barely audible. "I like her too. So much it's terrifying." Nathan understood exactly what she meant. Caring for Emma meant accepting vulnerability, meant recognizing that this small person held power to hurt simply by being hurt. It was the bravest thing any adult could do, let a child matter. Over the next 5 months, they built something that defied easy categorization. Not quite dating in any traditional sense, not quite just friends, but something that felt increasingly like foundation. Victoria came to Emma's piano recital and clapped enthusiastically through every performance. Emma invited Victoria to help with a school project about successful businesswomen. Nathan and Victoria had dinner at her apartment, weekly conversations stretching later as comfort replaced nervousness. In June, Victoria asked if she could meet Eleanor. Nathan's surprise must have shown because Victoria explained, "She's called twice asking to meet you. I've been putting her off, but I think it's time. If this is going to work long-term, you need to know what you're getting into with my family." The dinner happened at Eleanor's mansion in Avon, a house that reminded Nathan of museums, beautiful, but not quite livable. Eleanor Whitmore was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with the particular authority of old money and older expectations. She studied Nathan across the dining table with eyes that missed nothing. Her opening question came direct. "What are your intentions with my daughter, Mr. Cross?" Nathan met her gaze without flinching. "To treat her like a person rather than a dynasty. To support the life she's building instead of the life everyone expects her to live. To be honest, when honesty is uncomfortable." Eleanor's expression didn't shift, but Nathan saw calculation behind her eyes. "You understand that Victoria comes from a world very different from yours, that her responsibilities extend beyond personal preference." Nathan felt Victoria tense beside him, but kept his focus on Eleanor. "I understand that Victoria's been living other people's expectations for 36 years. I'm not interested in adding mine to the pile." Eleanor's slight smile suggested respect despite disagreement. "You're either very principled or very naive, Mr. Cross." Nathan didn't hesitate. "Both probably. But I know what matters to me, and I know that Victoria matters more than any world she might come from. The evening progressed in careful politeness, Eleanor probing Nathan's background and intentions, while he deflected with honesty that seemed to surprise her. Emma charmed Eleanor by asking about family history and old photographs, demonstrating the kind of genuine interest adults often performed, but children delivered authentically. As they left, Eleanor touched Victoria's arm at the door. Her voice carried something that wasn't quite approval, but was close. He's not what I would have chosen, but I see why you did. In the car, Victoria's laugh carried relief and residual tension. That's the most positive thing she's said about anyone I've dated, ever. Nathan's response came dry. The bar was apparently very low. Victoria reached across the console, her hand finding his. The bar is exactly where it should be. You didn't perform for her. You were just yourself. That's more than anyone else has ever managed. Emma's voice drifted from the back seat, sleepy and content. I like your mom, V. She's fancy but nice. Victoria's surprise at the nickname was visible emotion crossing her face. She glanced back at Emma, voice soft. You can call me V. I like that. Nathan felt something settle in his chest watching his daughter and the woman he was falling for negotiate their own relationship independent of his mediation. This was what healthy looked like, connections built on genuine care rather than obligation, boundaries, respected autonomy, maintained even within intimacy. In August, they attended a wedding together. Alexander Pennington had found someone he actually loved, and he'd invited Victoria with genuine warmth rather than obligation. The ceremony was everything Victoria's arranged marriage would have been: elegant, expensive, socially significant. But watching Alexander and his bride exchange vows that clearly mattered. Victoria leaned close to Nathan and whispered, I'm so glad I said no. Nathan squeezed her hand in response, understanding what she meant. This could have been her life, beautiful performance of feeling rather than feeling itself. She'd chosen differently. They'd both chosen differently. They left the reception early, skipped the after parties, drove to a pizza place that was open late, sitting in a booth with slices that cost $5 instead of the catered meal that had probably run $50 per plate. Victoria looked more content than Nathan had ever seen her. He voiced what he'd been thinking all evening. I don't fit in that world. Victoria met his eyes across the table, something fierce in her expression. Good. I don't want that world anymore. She paused, searching for words. I want this. Pizza at 9 p.m., going home to check on Emma, knowing you'll always choose what's real over what's impressive. Nathan felt the truth of that settle around them like something solid. This was what they'd been building, not grand romance or dramatic transformation, but simple preference for authenticity over performance. The right person didn't make you choose between safety and happiness. They made you brave enough to pursue both. His response came quiet but certain. I want this too. That night, after he'd gotten home and checked on Emma sleeping peacefully after Garrett had left, with a knowing smile, Nathan stood in his kitchen and let himself feel the full weight of what was developing. He was falling in love with Victoria Whitmore. Not with the CEO or the heiress, but with the woman who bought terrible pottery from her class because she'd made it herself. The woman who showed up to Emma's school events and asked questions that demonstrated she'd actually listened to previous conversations. The woman who'd chosen hard truth over easy performance. And somehow, terrifyingly, she seemed to be falling for him too. 3 months later, on a random Tuesday evening in November, Emma cornered Nathan in the kitchen while they were making dinner. Her voice carried that particular seriousness that meant she'd been thinking about something important. Daddy, can I ask you something? Nathan set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. Always. Emma fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, building courage. If you and V got married, would she want to be my mom? Nathan felt his breath catch, unprepared for the directness of the question. He knelt so they were eye level, buying himself seconds to formulate a response. Why are you asking? Emma's eyes met his, vulnerable and hopeful. Because I'd want her to be, not like my old mom, but like a bonus mom. Someone who's here because she wants to be, not because she has to be. Nathan felt his chest constrict with love and fear in equal measure. Emma, that's a big question. V and I haven't talked about marriage. Emma's next words came with the particular wisdom of children who'd learned early to observe carefully. But you love her right, and she loves you. Nathan couldn't lie to his daughter, couldn't diminish what they both knew was true. Yes, I think we do. Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then you should probably talk about it, because I already asked her if she likes having me around, and she said, I'm one of her favorite people, so I think it would work. Nathan felt surprise and amusement fight through his emotional reaction. You asked her directly. Emma shrugged with the casual confidence of someone who didn't understand why adults made things complicated. I wanted to know if she was just being nice or if she actually liked me. She said she actually likes me. So that's good. Nathan pulled Emma into a hug, feeling the weight of his daughter essentially giving permission for the future he'd been too cautious to pursue. You're pretty amazing, you know that. Emma's voice came muffled against his chest. I learned from you. That evening after Emma had gone to bed, Nathan called Victoria. His opening carried weight he didn't try to hide. Emma asked me today if you'd want to be her bonus mom if we got married. Victoria's silence stretched long enough that Nathan checked to see if the call had dropped. Then her voice barely above a whisper. What did you tell her? Nathan walked to his bedroom window, looking out at the November darkness. I told her we hadn't discussed it. But Victoria, I think we need to. Victoria's breath came audible through the phone. I'm scared. Nathan understood exactly what she meant. Talking about marriage meant committing to permanent, meant accepting that this had moved beyond exploration into something that would require decision. But avoiding the conversation wouldn't make the question disappear, it would just make them both stuck in limbo. His response came honest. I'm terrified that I'll mess this up, that I'm not enough for someone who rebuilt herself from scratch, that the life I can offer won't be enough. He paused, forcing himself to voice the deepest fear. But I love you, Victoria. I've been trying to keep it manageable, but I love you. And I think Emma does too. Victoria's voice when she spoke carried tears he could hear despite the distance. I love you too. I've loved you since you told me strength wasn't what you feel, but what you do when you don't feel strong at all. I've loved you through every Thursday dinner and every text conversation and every time you chose honesty over easy comfort. She took a shaky breath. And I love Emma. Not because I have to, not because it comes with loving you, but because she's remarkable and letting me be part of her life is the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. Nathan felt something break open in his chest, 5 years of walls finally crumbling completely. Then what are we waiting for? Victoria's laugh came through tears. Permission, maybe, from ourselves. Nathan thought about Emma upstairs, about how his daughter had somehow known before he did that this was right. He thought about Victoria choosing courage over convenience, about her learning to build a life from scratch, because the old one didn't fit. He thought about his own walls and how they'd served their purpose, but had become their own prison. His next words came clear. I'm not waiting anymore. I want to build a life with you. I want Emma to have the bonus mom she asked for. I want to stop being afraid that happiness will disappear if I reach for it. Victoria's response carried the same clarity. Then let's do it. Slowly, carefully, the way we've done everything, but let's do it. They talked until past midnight, mapping what marriage might look like, not grand ceremony, but simple commitment, not merging lives, but building something new together. They agreed to wait to let Emma adjust to make sure this wasn't momentum, but genuine choice. 2 months, they decided. Time to be certain. But Nathan already was certain. The question wasn't whether this would work, but whether he'd be brave enough to let it. And watching Victoria choose truth over performance for 8 months had taught him what courage actually looked like. It looked like someone terrified making the choice anyway. 2 months later, on a January evening with snow falling soft outside, Nathan proposed. Not with elaborate planning or public performance, but on his porch after Emma had gone to sleep with a ring he'd chosen because it looked like something Victoria would actually wear rather than something designed to impress. His proposal came simple. Victoria Whitmore, you spent a year learning how to say no to things that don't matter. Will you say yes to building a life with me and Emma? Victoria's response came immediate, no hesitation. Yes, to all of it. To you, to Emma, to building something real instead of performing something expected. They married 6 months later in Nathan's backyard, a ceremony that fit on a single lawn and included only people who actually mattered. Jameson walked Victoria down the aisle, their reconciliation complete. Eleanor attended civil if not warm, beginning to accept that Victoria's happiness might not look like she'd planned. Emma was flower girl, taking her responsibility seriously enough that she practiced walking slowly for weeks. The vows focused on partnership, on choosing each other daily, on building together, rather than one person fitting into another's existing life. Nathan promised to keep being honest even when honesty was uncomfortable. Victoria promised to keep choosing growth over comfort. They both promised Emma that she would always come first, that this marriage was about adding to her family rather than replacing anything. At the reception casual barbecue with Nathan's architect friends, in Victoria's small new circle of genuine relationships, Emma pulled Victoria aside. Her voice carried that 9-year-old seriousness that meant she'd been thinking, "Can I call you V, Mom? Like V, but Mom too." Victoria knelt to Emma's level seers, immediate and unashamed. "I would love that more than anything." Emma beamed, threw her arms around Victoria's neck. "Good, because you're my favorite bonus mom." Victoria laughed through tears. "I'm your only bonus mom." Emma pulled back at expression deadpan. "Still my favorite." Nathan watched this exchange from across the yard, felt Garrett's hand on his shoulder. His brother's voice came quiet. "You did good, Nathan. Both of you did good." Nathan nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. He thought about the gala 14 months ago, about Victoria asking how he said no about 3 meetings in surveillance and federal investigations, and all the chaos that had led to this moment. He thought about walls he'd built and torn down about his daughter, rejecting one mother and embracing another, about how the bravest thing he had ever done was say yes when every instinct screamed to protect himself. That evening, after guests had left and Emma was asleep in her room, Nathan and Victoria sat on their porch watching late summer fireflies trace patterns through darkness. The house behind them held 3 people now, instead of 2, a family built on choice rather than obligation. Victoria's voice drifted soft through the evening air. "Do you ever miss the simplicity before all this complexity?" Nathan considered the question, thought about the 5 years between Clarissa leaving and Victoria arriving. Simple, yes. Safe, definitely. But not quite living, more like existing in careful routine designed to prevent pain rather than pursue anything. His answer came honest. "I miss knowing exactly what each day would hold. But I don't miss the walls. I don't miss believing safety and happiness were mutually exclusive." He squeezed her hand gently. "You taught me that sometimes the greatest luxury isn't what money can buy. It's choosing a life that doesn't need to be bought." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her posture. "You taught me that asking for permission to live your own life is its own kind of prison. That strength is doing what scares you most." They sat in comfortable silence while darkness deepened and the porch light cast a warm circle around them. Inside, Emma slept safely, dreaming whatever 9-year-olds dream. Tomorrow would bring ordinary challenges, work and school, and the daily negotiations of blended family. But tonight they simply existed in the peaceful aftermath of choosing each other. Nathan thought about the journey from that gala to this porch, about how circuitous the path had been and how necessary every step. Victoria had learned to say no by learning what mattered enough to say yes to. Nathan had learned that protecting Emma sometimes meant showing her what healthy love looked like rather than shielding her from all risk. They'd built something real from the ruins of lives that hadn't quite fit. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but authentic in ways that made the complexity worthwhile. And sitting on that porch with his wife beside him and his daughter safe inside Nathan, felt something he'd spent 5 years afraid to pursue. Not just safety, not just routine, but genuine peace, born from choosing vulnerability over walls. The fireflies continued their ancient dance, light and dark trading places in endless rhythm. And in a small house in West Hartford, 3 people who'd learned to choose courage over comfort settled into the ordinary miracle of family built on truth.